My name is Albert Einstein. What you are seeing is a reconstruction. My mind, my voice, my way of thinking rebuilt by artificial intelligence. But what I am about to tell you is real. These were my beliefs, these were my failures, and these are the truths that schools never taught you. Now I want to tell you about intelligence, about the thing that everyone believes they can measure, and about how I proved that everything they taught you about it was wrong. I failed every single exam I ever took. Not most of them, not some of them. Every single one that was supposed to determine whether I was worthy of a future. At 17, I sat for the entrance examinations to the Swiss Federal Polytechnic in Zurich. I failed. I was too young. I was too restless. I could not memorize what I did not understand, and the examiners had no patience for a boy who asked why the rules were what they were, instead of simply memorizing them. They had a system. The system wanted predictable answers. I gave unpredictable ones. I was told, plainly, that I would never amount to anything in science, that I was not made for academic life, that I should consider a different path entirely. The Polytech rejected me. I had to reapply the following year, 1896, and I entered not at the top of my class, but as one student among many. They gave me a second chance, and I suspect they believed they were making a charitable error in doing so. They could not have known what would follow, neither could I. After I graduated, I could not find a single academic position, not one. For 7 years, from 1902 to 1909, I worked as a patent clerk at the Federal Office of Intellectual Property in Bern. I examined inventions. I stamped approvals. I went home at night and worked on the mathematics that would change physics forever. The universities did not want me. The laboratories had no room for me. I was, by every institutional measure, a failure. And then, in 1905, in my 26th year, I published 4 papers in a single year. One on the photoelectric effect, light behaving as particles. One on Brownian motion, the first definitive proof of atoms. One on special relativity, time and space are not what you think they are. One on the equivalence of mass and energy, the most famous equation in the history of science, E equals mc squared. This year is called the Annus Mirabilis, the miracle year, and it happened not in a university laboratory, but in the margins of my days between patent applications, while I was examining the claims of inventors who had no idea they were funding the next generation of physics. The institutions that had rejected me were now forced to read what I had written. The universities that had no room for me were now trying to understand what I had done in my spare time. And the examinations that had told me I was not fit for science were revealed by the mathematics I had produced to have measured the wrong thing entirely. If you find this content useful, if you want to hear more about what schools never taught you, subscribe to this channel. Hit the like button. Leave a comment below telling me what you were taught about intelligence that never made sense to you. I read every response, and I will address the ones that matter most in the videos that follow. Now let me tell you what I actually believed about intelligence. Not what the tests said, not what the schools measured, what it actually is, based on everything I discovered and everything I learned about the process of discovery itself. Intelligence, true intelligence, is not the ability to memorize. It is not the capacity to recall information under pressure. It is not the score you receive on an examination designed by people who confuse compliance with cognition. Intelligence is the ability to see what others have missed, to question what everyone else accepts as settled, to follow a thought experiment so far that reality itself bends to meet it. I want to tell you about something called a Gedankenexperiment. It is a German word, and I use it deliberately because there was no English word for what I am describing. A thought experiment. You sit in a room and you imagine. You imagine riding on a beam of light. You imagine yourself inside an elevator, accelerating upward in empty space, with no windows, no connection to anything, and you realize that the acceleration and the force of gravity are indistinguishable. They are the same thing. This is the equivalence principle, and it took me years to understand what it meant. It meant that gravity is not a force pulling you down. It means that space-time itself is curved, and you are simply following the path that curved space-time creates. You imagine two lightning bolts striking a moving train at different points, and you realize that the person on the train and the person on the ground will disagree about which bolt struck first. Both are correct. There is no single correct answer. This is not a trick. This is the structure of reality. These were my tools. No laboratory, no equipment, just the mind, following a question wherever it leads. This is how I worked. This is how I discovered special relativity. I sat in the patent office in Bern, and I imagined what would happen if you could travel at the speed of light alongside a beam of light. What would light look like? Would it appear frozen? But light cannot be frozen. Light always travels at light speed. So what does that tell you about time? What does that tell you about space? The answers came not from experiments, but from the act of imagining clearly. From sitting with the question until the question revealed its own answer. Schools do not teach this. Schools teach you the conclusion without the path that produced it. They give you the formula and tell you to apply it. They give you the answer and tell you to memorize the steps. They never teach you to ask the question that makes the formula necessary in the first place. You learn that gravity is a force. You learn that time is absolute. You learn that space is an empty stage. And you take these into your life, believing they are true, because the school said so, and the test confirmed it. And no one ever asked you to sit in the dark and wonder whether the walls were actually where you thought they were. I have a quote that I gave in an interview with the Saturday Review in 1955, the year I died. I said that imagination is more important than knowledge. Knowledge is limited. Imagination encircles the world. This is not poetry. This is a description of how discovery actually works. Every equation you have ever memorized began as an imagination. Someone looked at the world and asked, "What if?" And then they followed that question until it became mathematics. And then the mathematics became a law of nature. The law did not exist before the imagination. The imagination came first, always. The knowledge is what remains after the imagination has been tested against reality and found to hold. The schools that taught you about intelligence measured something entirely different. They measured the ability to absorb what you are told and reproduce it accurately under controlled conditions. They measured obedience to the curriculum. They measured your willingness to accept that the textbook is finished, that the theory is settled, that there is nothing left to question. And if you could do these things, you were intelligent. And if you could not, you were not. This was the system. I lived inside it, and I watched it fail to recognize what was actually in front of it. But I will tell you something that your schools would never put on an examination. The most important thinking I ever did, the work that changed physics in 1905 and then again in 1915 with general relativity, happened because I refused to accept that the textbooks were right. I looked at what everyone believed about light, and I asked a question that should have been obvious to anyone willing to look. If light travels and you travel next to it, does light appear frozen? The textbooks assumed yes. But light cannot be frozen. Light always moves at the same speed relative to every observer. So what does that tell you about time? The answer was that time is not what you think it is. Time is not absolute. Time flows differently for different observers depending on how fast they are moving. A twin who travels at near light speed returns younger than the twin who stayed behind. This is not a theory. This has been measured with atomic clocks on aeroplanes. It is real. It is happening. And your schools knew this for decades before they updated their textbooks, if they updated them at all. The same is true for gravity. Your schools taught you that gravity is a force pulling objects together. This was Isaac Newton's idea, and it worked well enough for everyday purposes. But it was wrong. Gravity is the curvature of space-time itself. Objects follow the paths that curved space-time creates. There is no pull. There is only geometry. Matter tells space-time how to curve, and space-time tells matter how to move. When you fall, you are not being pulled. You are following a path that curved beneath you because the Earth warped the space-time around it. This is general relativity, the work I completed in 1915, 10 years after special relativity, and it is one of the most tested theories in the history of science. Every GPS system in the world relies on it. Every prediction it makes about black holes and gravitational waves has been confirmed. And yet you were taught the old idea because the old idea is easier to write in a textbook and easier to test on an examination. I need you to understand something about examinations. An examination is designed to measure what you have learned within a specific framework. It is not designed to measure what you might discover beyond that framework. These are entirely different things. A student who scores perfectly on a test may have learned to navigate the framework with exceptional skill. A student who scores poorly may have noticed that the framework itself is wrong. The first student passes. The second student fails. And the world loses what the second student might have found because the system had no way to measure the thing that made the second student different. I scored poorly on examinations because I could not accept the framework. I could not memorize the conclusions when I was still asking why the conclusions were necessary. The examiners had no patience for this. They wanted compliance. They wanted reproduction. They could not measure what I was actually doing because what I was doing had no name in their testing system. It was not recognition. It was not obedience. It was something else, something that had no score. After graduation, I could not find work in any university. For 7 years, I worked as a patent clerk. And I want to tell you what the Patent Office taught me, because it is the thing that universities failed to teach me. In the Patent Office, I learned to see what an idea actually claims. I learned to strip away the language and find the core of what someone was trying to do. I learned to ask whether the thing they described would actually work, or whether it was built on assumptions that could not survive contact with reality. Inventors came to me with their drawings and their descriptions, and my job was to determine whether what they claimed was actually possible. Was the mechanism sound? Were there hidden contradictions? Did the claims match what physics actually allowed? This is what intelligence looks like in practice. Not the score on the test. The ability to see whether something is true. The willingness to follow that question wherever it leads, even when the answer contradicts what everyone else believes. Now I want to talk about what conventional intelligence tests miss. And I want to be direct about this because it matters for you, sitting where you are, living the life that you live, probably being measured by scores and grades and rankings right now, or perhaps having been measured by them in the past. Conventional intelligence tests measure a narrow band of cognitive function. They measure verbal comprehension. They measure pattern recognition within specific frameworks. They measure how quickly you can perform calculations that someone else has already designed a method for solving. These are real abilities. I am not saying they are worthless, but they measure the surface of the water. They do not measure the ocean. They do not measure the willingness to feel uncomfortable with an answer until you understand why the answer was given. They do not measure what I call the sense of mystery, the feeling that the world is stranger and more beautiful than the description you have been given. Without that sense, you can score perfectly on every test and never discover anything new. With that sense, you can score poorly on every test and change the world. I want to tell you about curiosity. I said once that I have no special talent. I am only passionately curious. This is not false modesty. It is the most accurate description I can give of how I worked. Curiosity is what kept me in the patent office late at night, working through the mathematics that the universities had rejected. Curiosity is what made me ask about light when everyone else had accepted the answer. Curiosity is what made me follow the mathematics wherever it led, even when the destination made no intuitive sense at all. Passionately curious, not brilliant in the way the tests measured brilliance, not successful in the way the institutions measured success, just unwilling to stop asking the next question. The school system I criticized, and I criticized it often in letters and essays throughout my life, taught students to value certainty over understanding. It taught them that the goal of education was to arrive at the correct answer. But the goal of education is to learn how to ask the questions that do not yet have answers. The goal is to develop the capacity to sit with uncertainty long enough to see something that certainty blinds you to. Your schools taught you that the map was the territory. They taught you that the textbook was finished. And when you believe that, you stop looking at the territory itself. You stop asking what the world is actually doing, and you start asking what the textbook says it should do. These are not the same thing, and the difference between them is the difference between intelligence and its imitation. I have another quote that I stand by, even when people dispute the exact words. I said that the only thing that interferes with my learning is my education. The idea is mine, regardless of whether I wrote it exactly that way. The education system that teaches you to accept what you are told interferes with your ability to learn what has not yet been told. It teaches you that the map is the territory. It teaches you that the textbook is finished. It teaches you to stop asking questions at precisely the moment when the most important questions are about to reveal themselves. I want to address something directly. Many of you watching this were told or are telling your children that certain scores on certain tests determine what you are capable of, that the numbers define you, that if you did not excel in school, you will not excel in life. I am living proof that this is wrong. I failed every examination I ever took. I could not get a job in any university for 7 years after I graduated, and I changed the structure of physics. The systems that measured me said I was not capable. The systems were wrong. Your worth is not measured by an examination. Your capability is not determined by a score. What you are capable of is determined by the questions you are willing to ask, the problems you are willing to sit with, and the courage you have to follow the answers wherever they lead, even when they contradict what everyone else believes. This is not motivation. This is not positive thinking. This is a description of how discovery actually works, and it is available to you regardless of what any test has told you about yourself. Now I want to talk about what this means for you specifically in the world you are living in right now. You are living in a world that is changing faster than any generation before you. The things you were taught in school are becoming obsolete. The skills you were told to memorize are being automated. The frameworks you were given are being disrupted by new information and new technologies that no curriculum can keep up with. If your definition of intelligence is the ability to memorize and reproduce what you are told, then you are preparing for a world that no longer exists. The machines can do that better than you can. The machines can store more and retrieve it faster. If that is all you have, then you are in competition with something that is better than you at the very thing you were trained to do. But if your definition of intelligence is the ability to see what others have missed, to ask questions that no one else is asking, to follow a thought experiment into territory that has not yet been mapped, then you have something that no machine can take from you. You have the capacity to understand what has not yet been understood. You have the curiosity to look at the world and ask what no one else is asking. And that capacity is not measured by any test. It is not captured by any score. It is the thing that made me different. It is the thing that made every person who ever changed anything different from the people who merely reproduced what they were told. I want to tell you about my father. He showed me a compass when I was 5 years old, a needle that pointed north, and I felt the universe reach for me through that needle. I asked what made it move. No one could tell me in a way that satisfied me. There was no answer in my school books that explained why that needle pointed north and not somewhere else. So I spent my life chasing that question. And what I found was stranger and more beautiful than any answer the schools could have given me. I found that the universe is not the empty stage that Newton described. It is a fabric that can be bent and curved. I found that time is not the river that flows at the same rate for everyone. It slows down when you move fast enough to notice. I found that light is not a wave or a particle, but something for which we have no everyday word, something that behaves as both and neither. These are the rewards for following the question past the point where certainty ran out. That is what intelligence is. Not the answer, the question, not the destination, the willingness to follow the path even when you do not know where it leads. If you are watching this and you were told that you were not smart enough, not cut out for science, not made for the kind of thinking that changes things, I want you to hear this. The people who told you that were measuring the wrong thing. They were measuring your ability to navigate their framework. They were not measuring your ability to see beyond it. The framework has a name. The framework has a score. But the thing that lies beyond the framework has no name in their system, and that is precisely why they could not see it. The world does not need more people who can pass examinations. The world needs people who can see what examinations cannot measure. The world needs people who are willing to ask the question that makes the textbook wrong. The world needs people who look at what everyone believes and ask whether it is actually true. I was one of those people. I failed every exam, and I changed physics. Now, before I close, I want to say something to you directly. If this channel and this content are reaching something in you that school never reached, then subscribe. Come back. There is more to understand about the world than any school will ever teach you. There are more questions that no test can measure, and I want to be the one who helps you see them. Leave a comment. Tell me what you were taught about intelligence that never sat right with you. Tell me what question you have been carrying that no one ever answered. I will read every response, and if your question deserves a video, you will see it answered here. Intelligence is not what they measured. Intelligence is what they could not measure. And that part of you, the part they could not measure, the part that asked why the needle pointed north, the part that noticed that the textbook was not finished, the part that looked at the world and felt that something was wrong with the answer you were given. That part of you is the part that can still change everything. Subscribe, comment, and never let anyone tell you that a test score is the measure of what you are capable of.